active transportation meeting for August. Good to see you. And Dirk, I'm glad you were able to ride into the downtown. I hope you had a good ride. And we're glad to have everyone online. Let's start off, if we don't, with the roll call. Rosie, will you go through the roll call?
Absolutely. So what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and read the names in the participants panel. And we will start at the top. We have Ned Hacker. We have WFRC Golden Spoke, and I see Mayor Burton and Andrea Pearson. I'm not sure who the third person is.
Hi there, Ellen Burrell. I'm on the City Council for Cottonwood Heights, and I'm just tagging along with Dirk this morning.
We met at the front runner station. She saw me on my bicycle, so I brought her over here with me.
Wonderful, welcome.
Thank you.
We have Ben Hewitt, Braden Mitchell, Brett McKiff, Clint Campbell, Cody Lutz, Grant Crowell, Hannah Carmondi, Heidi Goodhart, Hugh Van Wagenen, Marsha White, Marcus Stevenson, Mark Bradley, Mark Johnson, Mercedes Maestas, Michaela Jordan, Mike Subchak, Molly Signoretti. I'm sorry if I said it wrong. Patrick Singleton, Rick Crossley, Tim Harps, Travis Moat Willard, Troy Walker, Tyler Torres, Gwendolyn Knobloch, and Alicia Decura. And that's all I see on the participants panel. If I missed your name or if you came in after the roll call, if you can please drop your name in the chat for the meeting minutes, that would be great. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Rosie. I should just let everyone know, if you don't, I'm Mayor Troy Walker from Draper City and the chair this year of the committee. So again, welcome everyone. The next item for us on our agenda is an item for action, and it's a approval of the minutes for the ATC meeting held June the 8th, 2022. If everyone's had an opportunity to review those minutes, I would love a motion to approve them. That's a bad sign. Either no one's reviewed them or wants to make a motion.
I move to approve.
Mayor Burton, thank you. Motion by Mayor Burton to approve. Is there a second?
Yeah, this is Mayor Mitchell. I'll second that.
Thank you, Mayor Mitchell. All in favor say aye.
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 I'll vote aye as well. Is there any opposed? Hearing none opposed, we'll rule the minutes have been approved unanimously. The next item is a chair's report for me. And I just really have a couple of events to talk about coming up that we're participating in as a group. The first is it's the Utah Pedestrian Summit. It's on September 14th at the Utah Valley Convention Center. This summit is an event for planning, design, health, education, law enforcement, safety officials, and advocates to share experiences, opportunities, and successes improving pedestrian experience in our communities. The keynote speaker is Dan Burden, whom the White House recognized as one of the top 10 champions of change in transportation, and Time Magazine called him one of the 6 most important civic innovators in the world. This is definitely an event to get on your calendars. That does sound like a good speaker. Again, that one is September 14th at the Utah Valley Center. I don't have a time for when it starts. Hugh, do you know what time it starts?
8:30, I believe.
Okay, so 8:30 on September 14th at the Utah Valley for that event, Dan Burden. The next event is the Mobile Active Transportation Tour in Park City, Utah on Tuesday, October the 4th. Attendees will learn from Park City's success and challenges in creating a bikeable city, all the while experiencing on-the-ground infrastructure. So if you're interested in attending that, reach out to Hugh. Hugh, what time does that start on the 4th?
It'll be the afternoon, about 2 o'clock, I believe.
All right, so any of you want to go up there, that probably would be a great time to see Park City with the leaves in full change by then. Anybody have any questions about those two events or comments? Has anybody done anything exciting on an active transportation path in the last week? Okay, you guys need to get more active. That's all I can tell you. Mayor Johnson and I did a little mountain biking on some connected trails between Draper and Lehigh just yesterday. So, we've done something. So I challenge the rest of you this week.
Mayor Walker, I did one. I rode my mountain bike around the Castle Rocks State Park in Idaho.
Awesome.
That was, so that count?
That counts. That
Mayor
counts.
Walker, this is Ellen Burrell. May I share, on July 21st, I know that's more than a week ago, but we hosted in Cottonwood Heights an introduction to e-biking event. We had 65 people attend. We had demo bikes from Magnum Bicycles, and we took them on a guided ride from the Golden Hills Park in Cottonwood Heights to the Knutson Park in Holiday and back. And for the absolute beginners, they didn't leave the park and they tried out various e-bikes. So
Excellent. Very good. Good. Well, the challenge is out for all of you to get out there this week. If you can, do something on a trail or something active, you can tell us next time. All right. That takes us to our public comment period. Is there anybody in the chat or in online that would like to make a public comment to the Active Transportation Committee?
hand raised, Ellen Burrell.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I would be interested to know from the WFRC staff if the recent bill that was passed in the Senate that has to do with climate change, are there opportunities for funding for municipalities that'll come out of that bill that we in the city should be aware of related to active transportation?
Mayor, if it's all right, I'll try and take that one.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Councilmember Burrell. That's a great question. We're still diving into all of that. My initial impression is that there's not a ton for active transportation in that specific bill. However, there was quite a lot in the previous one that have come out, the IIJA, and a number of opportunities there. One of which we'll be talking about perhaps two of those in our meeting today. So definitely something to keep an eye out for, but I'm not aware of anything in this latest bill that is specific to active transportation, although we'll dive more into it and definitely let everybody know.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else who would like to make a public comment?
So I have my hand raised, Mayor Walker. So this is Rick Crosley, from the operations manager for Lime. And since our last meeting, we've deployed over 300 e-bikes, our powered e-bikes in Clearfield, Hill Air Force Base, and in Salt Lake. And we're seeing those being distributed all over the valley. So we put them in Salt Lake, but they're riding as far south as Draper. And then we got to send people to pick them up because, of course, as you know, we don't have an operating agreement with Draper anymore. So, you know, we want to make sure that we're legal. So if anybody knows of other cities, municipalities that would like Lime services, just get in contact with me so we can set up to make sure that we're legal, because we are seeing our bikes and scooters migrate into areas where we don't necessarily have an agreement. So we're trying to keep those under wraps. We're continuing to grow our fleet. We now have over 2,000 vehicles from Ogden all the way down to Orem. So.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right, seeing no more public comment, we'll move on to item number 4. And this is an update on the first and last mile 2 project. And we've got Angelo Papastomas with UDOT going to give us an overview of the multi-agency collaborative effort to identify and fund projects that connect more people to transit opportunities via biking and walking. Go ahead.
Yeah, so actually, I apologize. I will be filling in for Angelo today. He had a dental appointment, so no fun. But yeah, so as far as the effort, so I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Tiger Grant originally. UTA was able to get around $20 million from the federal government for first and last mile initiatives. So with the success from that program, we are now looking to do the 2.0 version, which is the first and last mile 2.0. Looking for raised grants from federal government, working with parametrics, WFRC, MAG, UDOT, and many other representatives from around different departments, different cities. We're trying to figure out, you know, what are the best projects that we can do and how we can achieve funding with these. So it is a pretty difficult thing to get as far as the funding goes. So we are very fortunate to have received it the first time. So we want to make sure that we do a really good job the second time as well. We're also having a very strong equity focus this round, which is really neat. So the group has come up with an idea to pretty much take equity focus areas, which are based upon access to the internet, cars, income, and minority population, to build an index as far as what areas within the state could use this most. And then from there, we're actually overlaying like a cost analysis. So we haven't quite completely figured out what number we want to use for it yet, whether it be $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, just to make sure that it's worth it as far as getting those federal funds, because they can be a little bit difficult at times. And we want to make sure that we're not wasting a lot of time when it could be used actually implementing these projects. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at currently with the FML 2.0 project. Really excited. There's a lot of momentum going though. Like I said, we've just kind of started getting the map going, as well as trying to figure out those last numbers. So within the next month or so, I could see some major progress happening. And yeah, I think we'll have a really good program coming up here and a really good application.
May I ask a question of you, Clint?
Yeah, of course.
So with the requests to access those funds, is wayfinding, that is neighborhood bypass routes that steer pedestrians and cyclists to get to their transit stop via neighborhood bypass routes instead of necessarily walking on or riding their bike on the more dangerous collectors and arterials? Can a municipality apply for funding for like wayfinding signs for share rows on the local roads? Could you speak to that?
Yeah, I could take a swing at it. And honestly, Hugh, if you have something that I miss on it, feel free. But yeah, so what I believe is it is something that could be accessed with those funds. The only issue is depending on project size. So a lot of this is like much bigger projects, as far as, like I said, over $200,000 amounts or $100,000. So we really are trying to tackle the big problems that are taking place within the community. But if there is a community out there that is facing first and last mile issues, it is definitely something that can be looked at to address. We do have an existing project list that are projects that we hadn't completed in the past, and some of those we're looking at finishing as well. And it's a pretty extensive list, as well as trying to add in any new ones that we've come across. But yeah, that's kind of my take on it, Hugh.
Yeah, thanks, Clint. And yeah, it's a great question. I think Clint spoke to as far as do those types of projects come to a dollar amount that is worth that the federal dollars, which tend to increase the overall cost and have some administrative burden. So that would be a big question there. And then Clint also mentioned that new projects that have been identified in local active transportation plans. Conroe Heights recently did an update with the Mid-Valley Active Transportation Plan. Those projects are being looked at and considered as well. So, and I apologize, Clint, if you said this already, you know, as we look at the equity and this cost filter on all of the, you know, there were 700 projects that we started with, we'll be reaching out to you as communities to say, hey, we identified this project as a good fit for this specific grant, and want to know if you're interested in pursuing it, right, and help providing a match for that and whatnot. So please look for those communications in the near future. But also, if there's a specific project that any one of you are thinking of that you think could be a good fit, we're more than happy to entertain that and run it through, you know, the criteria we're looking at everything else at.
Thank you.
So Clint, I have a question for you as well. West Jordan took advantage of the Tiger Grant back when that was available, so thank you for helping us with that. Do you need ideas from cities or municipality areas, or do you have that list already to submit to the federal government?
So like I mentioned, we do have a pretty extensive list of various things, and like Hugh had said, it is something where we will be reaching out. But I mean, any idea is a good idea at this point. So feel free, if you do have any input, reach out to any of us on the team, and we'll gladly try to get it in contact with the people that can use it.
Great, thanks.
Anyone else have a question or comment on item 4? All right, let's go to item.
Mayor, there's a comment in the chat. I don't know relevant to this, but it's from Mark.
Yes, I just didn't want to interrupt the meeting, so I thought I'd send the information here. But with Allie Pageant with Bike Utah, I'm assuming she's reaching out to all the communities on obtaining the tracking of the new miles since 2017 with the governor's initiative. So if anyone has her information, wouldn't mind providing that through. For some reason, we're having a difficult time responding back to her. Thanks, Jory.
Yeah, we should be able to get you that information pretty easily, Mark.
Okay, anybody else? All right, then item number 5 is a presentation on walkability, the Walkability Action Institute from Midvale City. Midvale City recently created a multidisciplinary team that participated in an effort to create a walkability action plan for Main Street. The team lead by Mercedes Maestas from Salt Lake County Health Department will present their efforts. Go ahead, Mercedes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us today. So can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick introduction to our team. Everyone's here today, and we are going to share the wealth of presenting to you guys today. So our team consists of, I am the team lead. I represent public health as I work in active transportation for the Salt Lake County Health Department. And then we have Molly Signoretti, who is also in public health, but she is a Midvale resident. So we pulled her in to have a unique perspective. And then we have our Midvale City Mayor, Marcus Stevenson, and our Midvale City Senior Planner, Wendolyn Noblock. And each person will kind of go through a different part of our action plan, but just to kind of give a brief introduction to what Walkability Action Institute is. So this is a course that is put on by the National Association of Chronic Disease Directors, which NACDD, if you hear us use that acronym, and it's also funded through Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, also known as the CDC. So the goal is basically to encourage people to have active transportation in their communities. So we gathered our interdisciplinary team of public health, transportation, planning, elected officials, and as this process has gone on, we have continued to pull in other areas as well. And then we went to a session, we have developed a team action plan for the city, and then we are slowly working to implement policy systems and environmental outcomes to make our city, our community more movable. And you'll hear us say movable instead of walkable. We just want to make sure that we are encompassing all people who are using the different infrastructure that we have. So next we will hear from Wendolyn.
So the Walkability Action Institute started out with a 2-day in-person session in Provo, where people from different disciplines were able to interact with one another and see some examples of what to do and what not to do in Provo. And all of us got an introduction of how walking can be encouraged in all types of active transportation. We were able to brainstorm and learn from the faculty that was there. And it was also quite helpful to be able to see what other areas in the state are doing. And some of you on the call here today were actually also part of that. So I found it quite helpful. There were many things that many of us knew, but we also learned, I think, new perspectives. And there was a great emphasis on the action plan, meaning how do we take the things we know or that we have learned and actually implement something that would help our local areas with active transportation and getting people out of cars.
So as I hope you all know, Midvale City has been working pretty hard to revitalize our main street. But in this process, we also know that we don't have as many people on the street as we would wish. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But a big reason is that unfortunately, Main Street is essentially used as a through street in our community. It's a small road that people tend to go fairly fast on, even though we've got a street right next to it that is made for that through traffic. And so part of this, what we did is actually try to figure out what is the end user experience on Main Street? Why doesn't the space feel comfortable? And how do we slow down cars in the process? So one of the main things that we found with this is that there's a number of crosswalks. It's only a 2-lane road and with many crosswalks, but still the crosswalks really aren't visible. They're made with brick, they're dark, they blend in with the road. And so we have a plan to how we can brighten up those crosswalks and hopefully help people slow down. I know as I've walked the street many times, even with only, again, 2 lanes, that it's not uncommon to come into close interaction with cars, unfortunately. The other piece of this is that we are trying to get more food establishments onto Main Street. We've got 1 restaurant and 1 coffee shop, but being outside near the road, again, even though that it's a small road, it really doesn't feel like a safe environment. So the second part of this is trying to create outside eating areas that feel safe, really trying to bring more pedestrians onto the road to make that end user experience safer for them. And that's kind of what, when we did this walking Main Street, were kind of the 2 things that we identified that we wanted to work on.
Awesome. And so during our second session, in person, they shared the topics for the virtual session. So after the second day in-person session, there were 7 virtual sessions where they continued to provide education, which was fantastic. These included things like creating equitable communities. So like Mercedes mentioned, making sure that we're focusing on movability rather than just walkability, and understanding the economic benefits of that, bringing together multiple agencies, which is something I'll talk about in a second. So individuals from, not just the city involved in planning, making sure that we are aware of language and understanding tactical urbanism projects. And then the final 2 sessions were on ADA and disabilities and chronic conditions, as well as sharing ideas and action plans and getting feedback. So Brett put this in the chat, but there were, I think, 6 groups, Brett, correct me if I'm wrong, but 6 other groups from the state. So we got to share and learn about what other cities and areas were doing. And they also got to provide feedback to us on our project as well, which was great. Something that we've been really lucky to do is bring together multiple organizations for this project. So not only the city, but Public Works as part of the city, and then UPD, which is Unified Police, has been a really big part of helping us create a space and collect data, which has been great. And then we also began involving the legal department from Midvale City to work on parklets, which we'll talk about in just a second, and then including the city manager. So making sure that everyone's on board for this project has been a huge portion of making sure it moves ahead smoothly.
So the action plan process, basically we just create SMART goals and create a plan on how to overall implement and create change behavior. So the 2 goals that we're working on, as mentioned by Mayor Stevenson, was completing crosswalk painting project to increase visibility and decrease the speed. So we are going to be out there. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then parklet building, where we can decrease speeds and have a little bit more interaction on the streets with our businesses on Main Street. So the process, so we are currently working through these action steps. So we completed our movability audit back in April. We created our budget in June. We are scheduling our painting and parklet event where we're going to paint and build. We are going to use some mural artists who came in and painted Midvale City's beautiful murals on Main Street to help us with the crosswalk painting. We're recruiting help. A lot of people are really interested and really want to come and paint with us, which has been fantastic. That's the exact goal, is to get that community involvement, and then just getting clearance and collecting the data that we need so that then we can host the event and see if it was overall effective. So right now we have been sitting on Main Street the last couple of weeks to really see like what the speeds are, what the environment's like during different times of the day. And UPD was so kind to also do a traffic study for us down Main Street. So right now they're collecting car count, speeds, and all of that kind of stuff for us so that then we can compare it to after our project has been complete.
Is that it?
Did we lose?
No, there's one more. I think we might have lost Gwendolyn.
Oh, okay.
He looks frozen. Oh, no.
Oh,
There
I
we
can
go.
talk about this. That's fine. So we are trying to involve the community a little more. As some of you may know, it's sometimes really hard to get community involvement as a local government. And one of the items that has stuck out to us is if we have some hands-on projects like building a parklet. We are planning on getting Hillcrest High School involved, and also, of course, the adjacent businesses. Main Street has, some retail. There are also 2 architects' offices. And so we plan on approaching them to help us with the design of the parklets. Not far away from Main Street is the road home, which we are hoping to include some of the residents there. And Mercedes already talked about the mural program we've had in Midvale, and we are hoping to tie the design of the crosswalks in with the existing murals on Main Street. There are also other ideas. There's the Boys and Girls Club, which we plan on involving, also church groups. So we are currently working on building those relationships.
One of the eye-opening things for me just through this process that I really wanted to press upon the elected officials in this committee is, I know for Midvale City, we've got an extremely tight budget, and anytime we talk about active transportation projects, how to create more movability in our communities, it's expense, expense, expense. And for this, everything we're doing, we expect to have some fair amount of impact on Main Street, and we're planning to spend around $5,000 to do all of this. And so I think that was one of the eye-opening things for me being a part of this community, is some of these kind of pop-up projects that we can do for fairly cheap, bring in the community. And not everything to help create movability in our communities has to be built around these massive projects. We need those, but there's a lot that we can do in our communities for pretty cheap. And I just that would be my main takeaway from this, is always thinking about what are these things that seem small to do in our communities, but hopefully will have that impact we're looking for.
So as we wrap up, we just want to say that hopefully that this is something that communities are willing to maybe try and implement in their own communities. It's something that is low cost, but hopefully it will lead to some permanent changes in our community. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. That was a great presentation, and I appreciate that it's something that doesn't cost an arm and a leg to make some significant improvements. That's an excellent point, Marcus, because all of us have tight budgets as well, but to be able to do something significant that's meaningful for pretty inexpensive. Is there a way cities can piggyback with you folks on this, or would you want to tell us how to do that?
Yeah, so first of all, since Salt Lake County Health Department is kind of like the lead of this, you can reach out to me and we can just start with a walkability audit or a movability audit, and we can walk through your city and kind of see like, okay, what are some ways that we can improve your city? And then we can also pull in the mayor and Gwendolyn, and they can kind of share some insight with their expertise as well.
Does anybody have any questions for Mercedes or comments on this presentation? Mercedes, thank you. That's excellent. We appreciate it. All right, the next item. Sorry, my eyes are getting to where I can't see it without the help. It's a presentation by the Canal Corridor Trail Study. Those of you communities that have canals, this is always a topic. It's a topic for us. Patrick Singleton, the Utah State University, is going to present findings from a report outlining the possibility of utilizing more canal corridors for active transportation. Patrick, go ahead, sir.
Hi, thanks. Can everyone hear me?
We can.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for the invitation. I'm Patrick Singleton. I'm an assistant professor at Utah State University, and I'm in the civil engineering department. And my focus is on travel behavior, traffic safety, and then active transportation. So I'm pleased to present to you today about our work looking at canal trails. I should acknowledge that much of this work was done with my master's student, Matthew Crump, as well as a partnership with another faculty member, Alfonso Torres Rua, who's an irrigation engineering professor, and his student, Adam Pack. Thanks also to UDOT for funding this. I should say what you're hearing today is not UDOT's views, they're my views. So that's just the clarification there. Thanks also to the Technical Advisory Committee who helped us on this project. All right, so I'm sure we all know that there's been increasing demand for outdoor recreation, especially during COVID. And we also know that off-street facilities for active transportation, whether that's for recreation or longer distance transportation purposes, are really valuable parts of our communities, providing a safe and comfortable way for everyone to use active transportation modes. Now, we also know that canal corridors can be an often ideal place to locate these off-street trail facilities. They're flat, they're straight, and they're often through our development communities. So the purpose of this research project was to understand the concerns and considerations that go into canal trails. How do we get them? What do we need to think about? And how should different organizations communicate with the different stakeholders to make them a reality? So before we get started, I want to define what we think of as a canal trail. So this is a publicly accessible pathway along an irrigation or drainage facility, usually within the right-of-way of that facility, that irrigation facilities corridor. It could look very differently though. So it could be hardscaped, it could be more gravel surface, it could be on top of an enclosed canal, could be alongside an open channel canal. They look very different. And often the trail itself is managed by a local government, while the irrigation facility is managed by a canal company or canal operator. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the history of canals in Utah and how central they are to the history of Utah and the development of many of our towns and communities. Some of these were built 150 years ago, often with community coming together and making these reality to help irrigate our communities and bring more development. Also in the 20th century, we had quite a bit of investment in reclamation and other water conservation efforts and construction of dams and other water facilities that helped develop some of these other canals. As we move towards today, we also know that many of these canals are being used, whether formally or informally, for walking, bicycling, running, some other uses that may be less desirable as well. So one of the hopes is that, you know, with some of these canal trails, they could help formalize some of those uses and help address some of those issues. So as part of the project, we took a twofold approach. First, we looked for as many canals we could find with trails in Utah. And we found at least 19, although I'm sure we missed a couple. A lot of them, as I'm sure you're familiar, are along the Wasatch Front, several in Cache County, and we also did find one out in Vernal. For these case studies, we summarized key information about what they look like, how they were funded and planned, how the construction took place, and any lessons learned about those. As part of that, we also conducted 30 interviews with various stakeholders, including staff and local governments, canal company or operators, engineering firms who've been involved in canal trails. And we tried to talk to communities and stakeholders who've involved in completed canal trails, planned ones, and also some that had no plans for canal trails. Our methods included semi-structured interviews. Since we were doing this via COVID, it was usually via phone and Zoom, and our protocol was approved by our human subjects reviews at Utah State University. So I want to now take most of the time to summarize our key findings, and we summarize these in different areas. So we'll start with land ownership, since that's one of the most critical pieces here. So when we think about the canals, one of the first things we have to think about is how is the canal related to the land that it passes through. So sometimes the canal company or operator owns the land in fee title. And in that case, the maybe local government who wants a trail should really be working directly with the canal company. In a few cases, there may be an express easement, which means there's a specific agreement with the underlying landowners to provide an easement for the canal for irrigation purposes. And in this situation, local government would probably have to work with the underlying landowners to agree to this new recreational use. However, the much more common situation in most of Utah and our communities is what we call a prescriptive easement. And that's where there may not have been a formal agreement to use the land for irrigation purposes, but this easement has been established after a prolonged use of the land for irrigation. And it may or may not, depending on the situation, may or may not require the approval of the underlying landowners, depending on how the trail is designed and other factors. So that, as I said, is the most common situation, but we have examples of where all of these have been used. So one of the other critical considerations when we're talking about canal trails is maintenance. So canal operators have quite a few maintenance tasks that they have to do, especially in the off season, but also year round. So we're talking about weed control, vector control, cleaning trash racks so the water keeps flowing, inspecting gates, dredging every few years, and especially road maintenance alongside the canal. So, and often this requires large equipment access. So there may be ways in which the canal should be designed, or the access to the trail can be designed to facilitate these maintenance activities. And one of the benefits actually of canal trails for canal operators is that maybe a local government manager of the trail can help assist with, weeding, collecting trash, preventing other sort of things from happening in the canal that might not otherwise be desired there. And I should mention that no canal operator that we talked to had any issues with maintenance associated with the trail, because they've agreed to that and figured those issues out first. Safety is obviously a really critical concern, especially if you're putting more people, more users adjacent to an open channel with flowing water. We know there's lots of safety concerns. The slopes of that canal may be really steep, and there's lots of other things that could happen there. So There are many different ways to improve safety. If there's a trail associated with a canal, obviously the easiest one is enclosing the canal. That removes that danger with the water. But there's other things we can do. So providing more of a buffer between the canal and the trail surface, whether that's landscaping or just more width. We did see an example of where fencing has been used, that the canal operator can still get their digger in and over that to perform maintenance and dredging purposes. We also heard talk of maybe a removable canal lid or a cap that could be pulled out if they need to get into certain areas, especially with very narrow canals. And then to deal with maybe some safety issues with the trail users, there's signage that can be done, maybe even for very narrow places, you might need to put in some mode restrictions, things like that. We should also mention that there are plenty of other examples in Utah of trails alongside water facilities that are much bigger and faster, so rivers and things like that. So, that's an issue. We did not hear of any issue associated with a fatality in an open channel canal and a trail. Certainly there have been issues that have been motivated canal companies to enclose canals, but nothing is directly associated with the trail that we discovered. Liability is another concern that canal operators may be interested in. It's important to know that Utah code does include immunity that protects both local governments and landowners from legal claims and lawsuits stemming from public recreation. So actually, this could be a benefit to the landowners or the canal operator for putting a trail in, because when that trail is open to the public, it may provide greater protections from legal claims. We should say we're not lawyers, so this is just what we've heard from talking with various stakeholders. But concerns could still remain, so there may be a need to still indemnify the canal operator from any lawsuits and having to pay for a defense, even if that lawsuit won't be successful. One way to formalize several of these issues is through a license agreement. And this is a legally binding document that describes the agreement between the canal operator and the local government, usually, that describes things like the trail rules, who does trail maintenance and what procedures take place there, procedures for canal maintenance, who pays for what, whether that's an enclosure, a trail, if the trail needs to be fixed or is damaged by canal maintenance activities, who pays for the trail maintenance, if the trail needs to be closed, what's those communication strategies, and indemnification that I mentioned as well. So this was used for, I think, almost every canal trail that we saw, and we do have examples. So if anyone's interested, contact us and we can put you in touch with the right people to get an access to those license agreements. We also know that adjacent property owners may be concerned about privacy. We know a lot of canals path through backyards or the places where they've sort of thought it as their space. So strategies to overcome this could be clear communication. So making sure that if there is a trail planned, clear communication across many platforms. Public meetings are really great use of that, different stakeholders and community members. And sometimes you may need to have personal meetings with individual households who may be reticent to putting a trail through their property or near their property. Funding, the big elephant in the room always, right? So the cost for a trail really vary depending on the service type, the width, the number of crossings it involves. One median value we've seen was about 500,000 per mile. Sometimes it's been $1 million per mile. Sometimes it's much less if you're reusing the existing road surface that the canal operator might have. There are different funding sources, whether that's the local option sales tax, state TIF funds, other state or federal trails or recreation grants. So there's a variety of fundings, and I'm sure others know more on this call about that. We did also want to point out there's two common ways of paying for enclosure, if that's part of a Canal Trail project. One is the Bureau of Reclamation's WaterSmart grants, which offer a 50-50 match for enclosure. Another common one is the Natural Resources Conservation Service 566 watershed grants, which pay up to 100% of enclosure in some situations, and notably up to 50% of a trail. So some of these water and enclosure grants actually provide bonus points in the applications if you provide a recreational use as part of them. So we did look at 5 particular case studies in much more depth. I'll point you to the report to look at those in more detail, but we tried to capture a variety of situations across Utah, different kind of communities, different trail and canal design situations. So I'm happy to answer some questions about each of these if you're interested. All right, just to summarize, we see quite a few benefits to canals and canal operators, whether that's all the benefits of enclosure, water conservation, water management. One key thing is it helps maybe define land ownership status. A lot of these canals were, there's still questions about who owns what's the right of way, that sort of thing. So discussing a trail can help define those, as well as I mentioned before, assisting with maintenance, addressing these illegal uses, and more eyes on the trail. I think you're all also familiar with the benefits of trails to local communities. So I'll skip that and go to my last point, which is how to get started. So obviously, it's really important to have a planning process that includes community engagement and discussions and prioritizations. A lot of the funding sources are only available if these canal trails are on city or county master plans, active transportation plans. Defining the land ownership status is really important as well, understanding what situation, fee title, express, or prescriptive easement applies. And then discussing your interest with the canal company. And it's important to note that a lot of these canal operators are really small. They're maybe 1, maybe 2 employees, maybe part-time employment, or maybe just volunteers. They don't have a ton of time to think about, oh, what about putting a trail or applying for enclosure funding grants. So it's beneficial to come to the table with things that maybe a local government can offer to help with, whether that's maintenance, indemnification, helping with grant funding, things like that. And then talking with other stakeholders is really key, because you'll often find those trail advocates, whether that's along the canal or in your other local governments, or maybe even among some of the canal operators. So just point you to a couple resources here, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
I have one question. This is Ellen. I know we had a canal project in Cottonwood Heights that came near our Mount View Park on the, I believe, the north side of Fort Union Boulevard, but it comes to an abrupt block. And I was told from my staff that the reason that the trail does not continue, I believe they said, was the Salt Lake City Metro Water District. But that doesn't really make sense to me, because you mentioned that almost all these canals are owned or managed by a canal company. Have you come across any challenges with municipal agencies or water districts, or can you speak to that at all? Or
that's a good question. Yeah, I don't remember that specific situation, but my understanding is the whole corridor of the canal is usually managed by one operator. So yeah, it could be, maybe there's some jurisdictional issues there, but yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
I had a question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, please, Clint, I'll follow up.
Oh, I just had a question about it. So when do you think enclosure is necessary? I've noticed with like a lot of the water projects around Salt Lake and various places, like daylighting is becoming more and more important, and having that like water there and visible. Is enclosure pretty much just, are we using that as something when maybe there's not enough space for a trail because of the right-of-ways, or why do you think enclosure is a good thing on this project, or why not?
Enclosure provides a bunch of benefits to canal operators in terms of water management. So We heard statistics of like, oh, maybe up to 50% of water is lost to seepage or evaporation. So being able to save that, gain those water savings and provide either more water to existing users or get new users is a huge thing, and maybe to sell that water to other new users as well is a big thing. We should mention that every canal operator that we talked to would enclose if they could get the funding to do so. That was definitely a priority for those water management quality issues. We did see there are some communities that want to see that water feature as an amenity. So one example is in Logan, the Lundstrom Park Trail Island Canal is the water users provided a small share of their water. They kept a small open channel adjacent to a piped canal so that sometimes of the year there would be at least some water in that facility. But we know that is an amenity that a lot of local communities want and don't want to get rid of.
Thank you.
Patrick, thanks for the presentation. And this isn't directed at you specifically, but I am wondering, after Patrick's presentation on canals, how many people on the call by raise of hands know of a canal that could be looked at more closely? And this is potential for their community to take a peek at. Just raise of hands, digitally or otherwise. And
I've got a question for you, Patrick. Going back to, because we have a section in our city that goes behind a neighborhood. And of course, the other parts of the canal that aren't behind the specific neighborhood are paved and it's open. But the neighbors, of course, it's always about the children in elected office. The children might die if they get in the canal. Now, these kids go get in the canal on the other end and float down it all the time. But with respect to always, and I'm not kidding, it's always about the children, and all you mayors know what I'm saying. With respect, you said you've not found a confirmed death in an open canal in your research?
Associated with the trail, we definitely heard cases where death in a canal has led to the canal operator wanting to enclose the canal.
But not off a trail. And aren't most of them with the trail open? Would you say by and large it's mostly that?
I would say it's at least half are probably open. Yeah.
Or that smaller fence that you showed in that one photo.
Yeah, most of it's open with no real fence. So, for example, some of these examples here.
If you can you go back to that one with the little, there was a black chain link fence.
Yeah.
Okay, now is that something that the canal company put in, or the city or municipality who put the trail in did?
I'd have to double check, but my guess is it was installed as part of the trail project.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Anybody have any other questions or comments? These are amazing opportunities for open, for trail space. I think it's a great way to, add more trail to your community and also kind of add a cool amenity. A lot of people like say there's sections of our Canal Trail that are just wide open, but this one area we need to build it. It's all about the children. So the children go on the other part and they seem to be fine. But that's interesting that there's no death in relation to a canal trail. That's a very interesting statistic. So I'm assuming everyone can get a copy of this presentation that they could use in their council or other meetings.
Yeah, I provide that.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody have any comments or questions further about it?
Patrick, one canal that I know about, the one that you showed in that last picture, was in Clearfield. Layton cities had not as good of luck working with the canal company to extend that trail. So it literally stops at the city boundary, right? And so do you have suggestions on that? Because I don't understand if it's a political thing or if it's, the different administrations within the canal company that were like, yeah, sure, we'll work with Clearfield, but now we're not doing that anymore, and we're not going to extend it into the Layton. Thoughts, suggestions on how a city would approach the canal companies to work with them to move forward? Because you have a lot of examples, there's a lot of current projects going on now, but I've also heard of quite a few roadblocks in the past as well.
Yeah, so I have to double check, but I do remember some of the discussions with that canal operator. They had some concerns about safety, or they were a little reluctant to extend those trails. But I would say in general, coming to the table with some things to offer, understanding. We hope that one of the big things from this research is understanding canal operators' concerns about liability, safety, maintenance issues, and allowing communities to come prepared to discuss ways to mitigate those concerns and examples to help mitigate those.
That's great. Thank you. That's a great presentation. I really appreciate that, because there's, like I said, I've got that in my own community, and I love how you've laid it out in the statistics. It's excellent. So very good. All right. That takes us to item number 7, which is another presentation, street safety and design. And Hugh's going to do this. So Hugh, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. And what I'm hoping here is that this sort of dovetails into what Midvale has talked about with their movability audits and slowing traffic down, and also what Patrick has alluded to in providing corridors that are safe for people to move in, assuming you can take care of the canal safety, but safe for people to use as active transportation corridors. And unfortunately, several of us, or most of us, I'm sure, are aware of a lot of the tragic deaths that have occurred between people driving and people moving outside of the cars over this last year. And just wanted to touch really briefly on some high-level thoughts on how street design itself increases safety for everybody using that street. So for those of you that have been in transportation a little bit, or talk to your engineering departments whenever a new road is going in or road improvements going in, you often hear this talk about level of service. And for those that aren't familiar, a level of service is, think about it sort of as how a roadway is performing, just like you would on a report card, for how well it's moving cars through a given space. And if it gets an A grade, level of service A, it's basically an open road. Cars are free to move about as they wish. And if it's a level F, right, it's failing and basically gridlock. So, and then varying degrees of traffic and speed in between A and F. And so this evaluation definitely has merit in improving the movement of vehicles. But as you look at this graphic, there's something that's really missing in the conversation, and that there's no mention of impacts to people walking or biking in any of these categories. And so a strict focus on vehicular movement too often places people walking and biking and otherwise moving in that space in unsafe conditions. And in some cases can also be detrimental to people driving. So in this, these two photo examples, see an image on the left and on the right. The road design on the left encourages higher speeds, offers little protection for anybody else using the roadway. Whereas on the right, the design encourages slower speeds and offers more protection through on-street parking, the center median. There are trees there that can act as protection, and also visual friction that slows vehicles down. And not all roads have to look like the right image, but managing the speed of vehicles and protecting other people moving through that environment are really crucial to improving safety outcomes. So slower traffic improves safety, and speed is not the same as speeding. Speeding is a legal term based on a set speed limit, whereas speed is just that, right? And the movement of that vehicle, and speed itself can kill. You can see in these graphics here on the left, as you move up 10 miles per hour, right, the likelihood of somebody dying being hit at that speed by a vehicle really increases. Over on the right, you can see as that speed increases from 20 to 30 to 40, the reaction distance for somebody to recognize if they're in their car that somebody's in the road and need to stop, that time increases, in addition to the braking distance that's needed. So you have to, one, recognize that there's a problem in front of you if you're driving, and then two, actually brake. And those distances and times dramatically increase with speed, which makes it really difficult to avoid those situations. The little graphic in the bottom right just shows you your cone of vision, again, relating to that reaction time as those speeds increase. So the more time you can get people to react to anything in front of them, the safer people are going to be in the event of a unfortunate collision. The likelihood of somebody surviving that goes up as those speeds decrease. So what are some of the options? Midvale talked about some of the treatments they're looking at on their main street. And really quickly, these are from the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Things like medians, creating pinch points, chokers that you see a lot of at the end of curbs or curb extensions, chicanes, which makes drivers slow down by alternating parking or curb extensions along a corridor, shifting a lane, little horizontal deflect, speed humps, two-way streets that are really narrow, so that as you approach one another, the oncoming car, you have to negotiate with one another rather than blowing by one another. This happened to me. I was on vacation in Washington, D.C. This last week, and if anybody's been in the Georgetown area, and some of the streets in those neighborhoods are really narrow, and I had to stop. Yes, I was driving, had to stop and wait for a car to get through one section so that I could then proceed. We were both going really, really slowly. Building lines, so your built environment as far as where your buildings are concerned. If you bring buildings closer to the street, again, that brings this visual friction in that helps people slow down. Street trees does the same thing and can also add as protection if there's a wayward car. This happened in my neighborhood a couple of years ago. Somebody was coming home from an overnight shift at work and were driving their car. They fell asleep, quiet residential road, but luckily there were some street trees there that as that person fell asleep, they ran into the trees and not further into a neighbor's yard. On-street parking can do the same thing. Roundabouts, diverters, signal progression, right? Timing the signals on the street based on a slower vehicle speed rather than, just cruising through at higher rates of speed. And these next little part talks about separating and protecting users. So again, where canal trails can come into play. The image on the left is a Mountain View corridor. It's a separated bridge, grade separated, so that users do not have to deal with conflicts at the street level. The second image in a protected bike lane. Right? There's physical and vertical protection for anybody using that bike lane from the vehicular traffic and the vehicular travel lanes. Reducing crossing distances for people biking and walking. And again, we talked a little bit already about some of the signalization for other users. Really quickly, I just want to touch on protected bike lane design. This is becoming the gold standard for bike facilities around the country. In this image, you'll see the cars. These are actually parked cars, this line of white cars. And you can see a concrete curb separating where the vehicles are parked and the bike lane. And the bike lane is also separate from the sidewalk zone where pedestrians are. We hear a lot of conflict between bikes and pedestrians and scooters and pedestrians. And so separating those users, again, gold standard. So having that curb protect there. If you don't want to do a curb, you can do planters, right? Or something like that. Again, this physical separation. If for some reason your finances or whatever else don't allow drainage, can't do anything like planters or curb, you can just have a buffer, but the parked cars themselves act as a protection from the moving vehicles on the left to the people on the right. You can see when you do this, people walking are even further from traffic than they would be otherwise. Crossing a roadway, also a really difficult thing. I won't go over all of these, but there are proven safety countermeasures that improve the safety of people crossing a roadway. And there are several of them here that are really, really helpful. And this comes from the Federal Highway Administration. A lot of studies and results have gone into this. One thing that in reference to Councilmember Burrell's question earlier in our meeting, what opportunities are out there for communities to take advantage of? Well, there is a program called the Safe Streets and Roads for All program, or SS4A for short, that the Federal Highway Administration has put out there, and applications are open. And this is essentially what it says, right? Trying to improve or prevent roadway deaths and serious injuries on our streets. One of the requirements before you can apply for a project to build is that a comprehensive safety action plan has to be in place that meets certain requirements. Wasatch Front Regional Council staff is in the process of applying for this safety action plan, which would encompass the WFRC region and perhaps slightly outside of that as well. And so that if that grant is awarded, go through that process of creating the safety action plan, which would identify certain projects that then could, in a later phase, later funding round, be applied for by individual cities. So keep an eye out for more information on that. I think the deadline for this, getting the plan applied for, is September 15th. And we're really hopeful that we'll get money out of that to create that comprehensive safety action plan. The last image I want to leave you with today is just talking about redesigning our streets when we can. At times, there are opportunities doing road reconstruction or otherwise. This is an example from Cougar Boulevard in Provo, Utah, formerly known as Bulldog Boulevard before the Provo High School was moved, which is adjacent to this. You can see the high school track down at the bottom of this image, but the image on the right is before the reconstruction of this roadway. And it was a roadway that, due to the number of lanes, and it connects two state facilities, not over a great distance, pretty short distance, if you're not familiar with it, but was really unsafe, and it was unsafe for people driving. And there were a lot of accidents here, and really, really uncomfortable for people biking, walking. So underwent a road diet, you can see on the right, and added a protected bike lane. You can see this green treatment, just lets people know about intersections, people pulling in and out. That's a protected bike lane. This is curbing here along the side. Reduce the vehicle travel lanes to 2 lanes in each direction. Put in medians here, central medians, which limit the turn movements of vehicles, again, which can also really improve the safety. And you see this just a big difference in the function and the safe feel of this roadway. And as a result, a lot more people are walking, using this as a bike route to get to a lot of businesses and destinations along the way. And it was uncomfortable for people driving to get used to it first, because no left turns, we're only in certain areas. Yeah, these were curbs. And so it could be frustrating, but ultimately it's proven to be much safer for people driving and other people moving in the corridor. So it's definitely possible to make happen. So again, that's a really high level overview of street design and safety. And again, bottom line is trying to reduce the speed of vehicles where there are other people moving in that same space is really important. And there are a number of ways to do that. But if there are not any questions, I'm done. Thanks, Mayor.
Hey, Hugh, I put in the chat, UDOT had just recently completed a speed management study. Because often I think they get lots of requests just to reduce the speed in a corridor, and it's not as simple as that. So check out that link. It correlates a lot with all of these, your whole presentation here, but it's a good resource to actually help reduce the speeds physically, like you're saying here with these amenities. And then Ben, it looks like you've put in the chat something about HR 5376. I don't know if you want to make mention of any on that.
Just in response to that earlier question, I'd known that I had seen something from AASHTO highlighting this. So there is a section in that bill that has a grant program that has a couple of different purposes. So there's going to be more information to come out of that, I assume. It's a long bill, so it was kind of buried. But
thanks, Ben, for pointing that out, and thanks, Joy.
Well, and Hugh, I'm thinking too. Greenbike just had their ribbon cutting up in Ogden, and they had just implemented another separated pathway within the road right away, similar to their Grant Street Promenade. It's now on 26th Street. So we're seeing these pop up all over, right? There's some in Ogden, Salt Lake City, Provo, and hopefully we'll continue to see these higher levels of improvement. I think they benefit the bikes, the scooters, all users, and kind of separate a little bit between walking and biking, and then also biking in the vehicles. So kudos to all the communities that are moving this forward, and looking forward to more in the future.
Anybody have any questions or comments? Thank you. That's a great, I love seeing those protected bike lanes. I wish UDOT, I hope you're listening, would put them on Mountain View Corridor all the way down. If you can get on that, that'd be great. Next is item 8. It's an update on the regional transportation plan, and Jory's going to do that. Go ahead, Jory.
Yes, thanks. It'll be Jory and Julie, both of us with the long range plan group here at WFRC. So thank you. Hopefully you can see my screen. Looking for at least one thumbs up or a nod. Thank you, Brett. We, if you have not heard, develop a regional transportation plan. The current plan fits underneath the Wasatch Choice Vision. So the Wasatch Choice Vision includes economic development, land use, and transportation, and it's built off of the 10 goals you see there on the right side. So as we work through our regional transportation plan, we fully utilize those 10 goals and develop the entire plan through that kind of screening process and lens. Reminder, as I made mention, the current plan is 2019 to 2050. We're currently developing the 2023 to 2050 plan. So it's more of an update, but with a lot of additional looks to the plan. It's multimodal, active transportation, roadway, transit, connection to land use. We develop it on a 4-year cycle, and we have 9 months left before our regional council adopts this new plan in May of 2023. It's financially constrained, meaning it's not just a wish list of projects. We work very closely with our partners, UDOT, UTA, the other MPOs, to develop a plan or a model that not only reflects the financial assumptions now, but that we have, or the revenues, but future ones. And it has to conform with our air quality conformity budgets that we get from the state. It's broken into 3 phases. You can see them there, 2023 to 2032, 2023 32, 33 to 42, and 43 to 50 are the 3 phases. So they're roughly in decades. We have been working on the plan for the last 3+ years. About a year ago or more, we looked at external forces and policies, which included relevant active transportation, micromobility, and other components within that, connected and autonomous vehicles, transit priority, and teleworking. There were 22 of those external forces and policies that we looked at over the last year. We drafted a preferred scenario this last winter with your help, and we currently have reviewed needs-based phasing with you all this last spring. How we did that, we went out to Wasatch Choice workshops, and as you can see there on the map on the left, we break our region into 8 different sub areas, 1 up in Box Elder, 2 in Weber, 2 in Davis, and 3 in Salt Lake County. And we utilize our interactive mapping tools to gather comments. So we did that this last fall. We then moved into our phasing criteria and our needs-based phasing, and this is how we identified when projects were needed based on these scoring. And you all saw these this last spring. You helped us refine the scoring for active transportation, and all projects within our regional transportation plan for active transportation, transit, and roadway were scored between 0 and 100 and compared against each other. We took comments in April and May, and active transportation won. We got the most comments for active transportation projects and when they were needed. So Hugh is constantly busy reviewing those comments, following up with commenters, and working with our transportation partners to address those. Not far behind road and transit with the 161 also between those two. We also coordinated very closely with our Regional Growth Technical Advisory Committee and our Transcom TAC, which are the planners and engineers from each of our communities. So if you're on here and you're not sure if your planner engineers are attending those meetings, please encourage them to continue to attend. Those are our main conduit as we work on the plan to coordinate with each of the communities until we get to the workshops. We now, this summer, are developing a financially or a fiscally constrained plan, which means we're reviewing the revenues and expenditures. We've updated the cost of all of the projects per mile for planning purposes. We've updated our revenues, looked at growth rates. We've looked at the IIJA, the federal funds, incorporated that into our models. And with active transportation, notably, updated the new state funding sources that have come about since the 2019 plan, which includes the TIF, active transportation, and the TTIF, first last mile funds, working closely with our partners, along with local option sales taxes, the WFRC funding, and then the programs that we fund. So you can see that the STP, CMAQ, TAP, and the Safe Routes to School, JHC. So we're updating our models. This will be the first time that we actually have a financially constrained active transportation plan. So it's going to be on par with road and transit. We're not required to have a financially constrained active transportation plan, but as we're continuing to move forward and seeing funding become available, it's good to elevate active transportation to this level. Also, to figure out how much needs we have and how much revenue. And so I will hand the baton off to Julie, and she's going to run through some of those the needs and revenue with you all. Stop us if you have any questions. If you have questions for me now, I'm happy to answer. If not, I'll hand it over to Julie.
Okay, great. So based on that financial model that Jory just explained, this is the available revenue that we have by mode for the planning time in the plan. So on the active transportation side, we have just under $1 billion worth of revenue that we're expecting. And again, those funding sources are the federal funds through CMAQ, TAP, STP, the state funds coming from TIF, active transportation, and TTIF, first mile, last mile, and then funds from joint highways and safe routes to school. We have just under 18 billion for road, to put that active transportation amount in perspective, and then just over 5 billion on the transit side. So what does that look like for active transportation if we break it down by phase? So Jory mentioned earlier how we did needs-based phasing. This is how the overall active transportation needs, we have about $1.1 billion worth, breaks down by the 3 phases. Just over half of that, or $660 million, is needed in phase 1. About 250 million is needed in phase 2, and about 250 million is needed in phase 3. Obviously, you'll see that phase 1, active transportation is heavily funded in phase 1, or needed in phase 1, and part of that is just that the active transportation network compared to our road or transit network is a little bit immature, meaning we don't have a lot of active transportation facilities already on the ground.
Julie, a reminder to everybody, these are in today's costs, so not the future cost of the projects, right?
That's correct.
So if we were to get all the money now, or just to look comparable, they're all in 2023 costs.
So how does that compare with the revenue that we're expecting to be available for active transportation? Overall, earlier I told you that it's about $0.9 billion or $900 million. And how that breaks down in phase is pretty even, with about $320 million by phase, a little bit less in phase 3, primarily due to fewer years in phase 3. This is a 28-year plan, 8 years in phase 3. So what happens is when we financially constrain is that you'll see in phase 1, we can only fund about half of what's been identified as phase 1 needs. And so that remaining half that is sort of lower in priority, I guess I'll say, gets pushed back to phase 2, which means that then we have phase 2 dollars that need to pay for part of phase 1 and all of phase 2. Whatever we can't fund there gets pushed back to phase 3. And then whatever we can't fund in the unfunded phase 2 and the phase 3 needs gets pushed to an unfunded phase. Because we have about $1.2 billion in need and only about $900 million in revenue, quickly doing the math, that's about $200 million of unfunded need in the plan. And so if you've attended our planning technical advisory committees or engineer technical advisory committees, then you've already seen our needs-based map. I mean, our financially constrained map, where we've put out there a draft financially constrained plan for comment. And so you might have seen overall how much unfunded projects there have been. So if you go to the next slide, I can put this into perspective of the roadway. So again, here, phase 1 has a lot of unfunded needs, and overall, we're looking at about $7 billion worth of unfunded needs on the road side. And then if you can look at the transit slide on the next slide, about half of the transit needs are unfunded in the plan. When we combine all 3 of the modes, you can see that we're about 2/3 funded. We have about $38 billion worth of needs between the 3 modes, and can fund just about $24 billion. So this is how it is all of the plans. We have way more needs than we have funding, but just to put that in perspective of what active transportation looks like compared to roads and transit, and then what the overall network is. Does anyone have any questions about the revenue sources, the projections, or the needs? Okay, Jory, if you go to the next slide, so I'll just walk through the remainder of the Rtp development timeline. So we're currently fiscally constraining. I mentioned that we have a draft fiscal constraint map out. The comment period for that just closed. We're working through those comments that we got now, with the idea that in this fall, we'll be doing workshops with our local communities. Jory mentioned before those workshops and how we got needs and then review of the needs-based phasing. And so we'll do again the 8 workshops into the small areas, 4 in Salt Lake County, and then 4 in Davis and Weber and Box Elder counties. We will continue coordinating with the Unified Plan on financial constraints or financial revenues, and then with UDOT and UTA this fall. After those workshops, and we've addressed the comments that we got in the workshops, we will be going to a public comment period this winter and early next year. And then we will be taking the final plan to the council in May 25th, Jory's very exact, May 25th, for adoption. And then we would have a new 2023 to 2050 regional transportation plan. Jory, do you have anything else to add there?
Nope.
So if anyone has questions about the schedule or the process, I can answer those now.
Any questions for anyone? Thank you for that presentation. That's excellent. Next item is.
I'm sorry, Mayor. We'll just drop in the chat the map if you want to review maybe what the projects are and what phasing they're in.
That'd be great. Thank you. Next item is other business. The next meeting is scheduled for October the 12th, 2022. And some upcoming events. Regional Growth Committee is August 18th. Transportation Coordinating Committee is August 18th. WFRC Council meeting is August 25th. Jory, is that going to be remote or in person?
Unsure. Let me look real quick to see what it is in the calendar.
The council meeting will be both remote and in person.
Okay, so optional for however you want to attend?
Correct.
All right, thank you. And then again, that Utah Pedestrian Summit, September 24th, and then the Park City Mobile Transportation Tour, October 4th. So that's what's upcoming. Is there any other business anyone wants to bring up or anything to discuss?
Hey, Mayor, I know Michaela Jordan. Perfect. Go, Michaela.
Thank you. I want to let you all know, and some of you may have gotten an email about this. It was sent to city staff. But we have the Transportation and Land Use Connection program where we provide planning technical assistance. And this year we're hosting some open discussions and question and answer meetings on different topics. And one of them is on active transportation implementation and corridor plans. So if your community has a need related to that and you're thinking about applying for some TLC planning technical assistance, that's a great opportunity to come and ask some questions or just brainstorm project ideas. The one for active transportation is tomorrow from 11 to 11:40 a.m. And I'll enter the Zoom information into the chat again.
Thank you. Anything else from anyone?
Mayor, one other thing, WFRC and Bike Utah are currently looking at doing an out-of-state mobile active transportation tour, which would most likely happen before our next meeting or closely to it. Still working on the date. If anybody's interested in attending, we like to get, elected officials, key staff, not always looking for the champions. They're already on board, but if you have somebody on the fence, and we love to have our UDOT partners. So, Ben and Heidi, I don't know if Ben or Hugh's reached out to you, but we've had great success with partnering with UDOT and UTA staff also attending these. So reach out. It's obviously not, we can't handle everybody that would like to go, but if you're interested, if you have legislators in your area that are interested or some that you might think would be interested in attending, let us know as well. It's usually just a couple days, and out, do a tour around the community, talk to other staff, DOT, legislators, and then, head back. But really helpful. And then obviously that Park City mat will be a great local one that, has huge benefits. So let us know or reach out to Hugh.
All right, anything else? Is there a motion for adjournment?
Nobody wants to leave. Thanks, Mayor.
Who made it?
I'll make it. I'll move to adjourn.
All right, we have a motion to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
Everybody that showed
Thank
up in person gets a free water.
Ooh.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a great rest of your week.